My name is Lila Corbin, 29 years old. The day I learned my grandmother left me everything, the air in the lawyer's office felt thick enough to choke on. The blinds were drawn halfway, slicing the sunlight into narrow beams that painted the polished wood desk in stripes of gold and shadow. My Aunt Clara sat across from me, her posture flawless, the kind of woman who treated grief like a performance art. Beside her, Edwin, her husband, looked like he'd rather be closing a business deal than attending a will reading. The lawyer cleared his throat. "To my granddaughter, Lila Corbin," he began, his voice steady but detached. "I leave the entirety of my estate." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. My heart stumbled. Clara's manicured hand froze midair, a diamond ring catching the light like a blade. Edwin's jaw tightened. Then the lawyer continued, "On one condition. Lila must reside at Willow Creek Manor for 30 consecutive days, alone. No phone, no money, no outside contact. Only what the property provides. If she fails, the entire inheritance reverts to Clara and Edwin Pierce." The silence that followed wasn't really silent. It buzzed, electric and cruel. Clara leaned back in her chair, lips curling into a small, triumphant smile. "How poetic," she murmured. "Mother always did have a flair for theatrics." I sat frozen, the words bouncing inside my skull. 30 days. Alone. In that old ruin I hadn't seen since childhood. I managed a laugh, dry and brittle. "You can't be serious." The lawyer didn't blink. "The terms are binding." Edwin finally spoke, his voice smooth as glass. "You're welcome to decline, of course. No shame in admitting you're not built for isolation." The jab hit its mark. I forced a smile. "You'd like that, wouldn't you?" His lips twitched. "Just being realistic." I left the office with the taste of dust and resentment in my mouth, the papers trembling in my hands. I didn't want the money. I wanted answers. Why me? Why this strange test? My grandmother, Evelyn Corbin, had been a legend. Sharp, ruthless, a woman who built an empire from crumbling foundations. But she'd never been kind. To her, I was the soft one, the dreamer, the disappointment. Still, that night, I packed a single backpack and boarded the bus to upstate New York. The drive felt endless. Miles of fog-wrapped forest rolled by, the trees pressing closer as if whispering secrets to each other. When I finally saw the iron gates of Willow Creek Manor, my breath caught. They stood tall and rusted, twisted with vines. Beyond them, the mansion loomed like a shadow against the gray sky, its once grand facade choked by ivy, its windows boarded up like blind eyes. The lawyer who'd accompanied me stopped the car at the gate and handed me a single brass key. 30 days begin now, he said, not meeting my eyes. The gates creaked open, and before I could change my mind, I stepped inside. The gravel crunched under my boots. The air smelled of wet earth and decay. Every step forward felt like walking into someone else's forgotten memory. When I reached the door, the key turned with a reluctant click. The hinges groaned as the massive oak door swung open, exhaling a breath of stale air and dust. Inside, the mansion was a mausoleum. The chandelier above was veiled in cobwebs, and the grand staircase curved upward into shadow. The silence pressed against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. I wandered through rooms that looked frozen in time, velvet drapes rotted to threads, portraits of unsmiling ancestors staring down at me with judgmental eyes. I found the kitchen, but the cabinets were empty, save for cracked plates and a rusted tin of tea. The tap coughed up brown sludge before dying entirely. By the time night fell, I'd found a candle stub in a drawer and a threadbare blanket from a linen closet. I curled up on a sagging couch, the cold gnawing at my bones. Outside, the wind howled through broken shutters, and the house moaned like it remembered pain. I told myself I wasn't afraid, but when something skittered behind the walls, I whispered a prayer I hadn't said in years. At some point, exhaustion won. I drifted into uneasy sleep, dreaming of footsteps echoing down the hallway and a voice, faint, familiar, calling my name. When I woke, pale morning light filtered through the grimy windows. The house seemed less monstrous in daylight, almost lonely. Hunger drove me to the kitchen again. I tore through shelves and drawers until I found a single mason jar of peaches, tucked behind a stack of empty jars. The fruit glowed like amber in the weak sunlight. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I laughed, a short, breathless sound. The lid popped with a soft hiss, and the scent of syrup and summer filled the air. I sat on the cold floor and ate with shaking hands. Each bite was sweet and almost sacred. It wasn't just food, it was deliberate. Someone had left it here for me. My grandmother had been meticulous. She didn't believe in chance. Every detail of her life and death had purpose. The jar felt like a message, a whisper from the past. Look closer. I looked around the kitchen with new eyes. The faint outline of a footprint in the dust, a pattern of scratches near the pantry floor, the smell of lavender beneath the must. That night I explored more. Every room creaked and sighed under my touch. The study was locked, but through the crack under the door, I saw the glint of something metallic. A key? A latch? The curiosity burned brighter than fear. For the first time since I'd arrived, I wasn't thinking about survival. I was thinking about discovery. By the firelight of my candle, I opened my grandmother's old writing desk in the parlor. Most drawers were empty, but in one corner, beneath a stack of faded envelopes, lay a photograph. It was of Lila Corbin as a young woman, standing in the garden beside a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark-haired, smiling in a way she never did in any memory I had. On the back, a note in her handwriting. For the one who still believes in growing things. I ran my thumb over the words, a strange ache rising in my chest. I realized then that this house wasn't meant to punish me. It was her final conversation, a story buried in dust and silence, waiting for me to listen. I wasn't here just to endure. I was here to uncover what she'd never said. I closed the drawer, the photo clutched to my chest, and whispered into the dim air, "All right, Grandma, let's play your game." Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the windows like a sigh of approval. And somewhere deep in the house, I swore I heard a door unlock. By the second morning, the house had learned my footsteps. Floorboards quit protesting in the same places. Doors yielded without quite so much theater. I boiled rainwater in a dented pot I found under the sink, waited for the foam to fall away, then let the steam warm my face like a small mercy. I ate slowly, stretching the memory of peaches across hours, as if sweetness could be rationed the way courage could. I started a tally on the inside of my wrist with a nub of charcoal from the cold hearth, 1 mark for each day. It felt like making a promise to myself in a language the house could read. Outside, brambles had swallowed the garden beds whole, but I recognized blackberry canes and a stubborn line of wild mint pushing up through the cracks. My grandmother had once told me nothing ever truly leaves if it took root first. I didn't think she meant me. The study door nagged at me all morning. Its keyhole yawned like a dare. I searched the parlor again, every drawer, every envelope, and finally the underside of the writing desk. My fingers brushed a strip of old fabric. I tugged, and a tape-bound parcel slid into my hands. Inside, a ring of antique keys, each different as teeth. The third one turned with a reluctant click, and the study inhaled as I entered. It smelled like ink dried decades ago, and something floral hiding beneath the dust. Shelves ran shoulder to shoulder along the walls, ledgers shoulder-checking poetry, contracts pressed against novels, as if even in death, my grandmother didn't quite trust softness unless it was bracketed by hard numbers. A single window, blind with grime, cast a dim wash over the desk. There were no photographs here, no trophies, only papers stacked with a mathematician's discipline, until my eye snagged on one shelf that didn't sit flush against the wall. It was a small thing, the slightest forward tilt, thin as a secret. I knelt and found faint grooves along the baseboard, like something had been dragged again and again in the same line. A book resisted when I tugged it, not the book itself, but a face pretending to be one. The spine sagged hollow in my hand. A latch answered with a soft, satisfied click. The entire shelf trembled, then swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow passage only as wide as my shoulders. I stood there a long beat, candle wavering, heart tearing through the silence like it had claws. "All right," I breathed, and slipped inside. The hidden room was the opposite of the rest of the house. Spare, clean, almost tender. A small desk, a straight-backed chair, a stack of leather-bound journals arranged with care. The first was the color of rainwater. I opened to a neat, deliberate hand I recognized from check signatures and holiday cards that never said more than, "With best wishes, Y. E.C." But this script was alive, leaning forward as if trying to speak quicker than the ink would allow. I was 16 and the sky would not stop looking at me like it knew something I didn't, the first line read. I copied numbers to feel the world add up. I left wildflowers on my windowsill to see if anything softened. I had the ridiculous thought that if I counted every star over the cradle, the baby would never cry. I read standing up, cheeks stung red from cold, candle cupped in my palm to keep the drip from marking the page. A girl unfolded beneath my eyes, ambitious, tender, furious with the smallness of her town and the shape of her options. She fell in love with a painter who argued with light the way some men argue with God. He did not come from money, and that mattered to everyone but them, until it mattered to her, too. By the time the candle bruised the air with smoke, I'd finished the first journal and knew I would follow wherever she pointed next. The second waited beneath the first like an echo. The third hid a pressed sprig of lavender between pages that described a day in winter when she bought her first parcel of land and learned that victory and loneliness can taste exactly the same. I read until my knees complained, until the birds in the overgrown apple trees began to scold the morning. When I finally stepped back into the study, the house seemed taller, as if straightening under the attention. I cleaned the hearth the way my grandmother had taught me, stacking kindling like a small cathedral, and coaxed a flame from stubborn ash. Warmth crawled back into my fingers. I felt less like prey and more like someone who'd remembered her name. That afternoon, the driveway answered with the grind of tires on gravel. I knew the cadence instantly. Expensive wheels spinning in patience. I stood at the front doors, heartbeat steadying into a drumline's measured climb. Clara arrived first, coat cinched tight, cheekbones sharpened by a smile that didn't touch anything human. Edwin followed, clipboard tucked beneath his arm like a sermon. "Sweetheart," Clara sang, stepping into the foyer as if it were still hers. "You look positively rustic. How brave of you." "Brave is a word people use when they want you to do something dangerous for their benefit," I said, light as I could manage. Edwin's gaze flicked over the room as if searching for proof I'd slept through my own alarms. "We're here to confirm compliance," he said, like I wasn't there, like he was taking inventory of a warehouse. "No phone, no visitors, no creative interpretations." "You'll find I'm very literal these days," I replied, and felt the weight of the hidden room tug at my sleeve like a secret begging not to be blurted. Clara's hand grazed the banister, one manicured finger tracing centuries of polish gone dull. "Mother always said Willow Creek tested character," she murmured, and the glint beneath her eyelids was not grief. "I suppose we'll see whether yours prefers velvet or steel." They prowled more than they toured. I kept pace, pointing out exactly nothing. At the kitchen, Clara paused, eyes cutting toward the pantry as if she could smell the memory of peaches. "Surviving suits you," she said, not quite disappointed. "Understanding suits me better," I said, and watched confusion snag, then smooth, on her face like a slip caught on a nail. When they left, I listened to the car for a long time after the engine had given up the argument with gravel. The house exhaled. The silence settled back over us like a quilt with a history. I returned to the journals. The second set lived in a cedar box tucked behind a false back in the nursery's dresser, wood warped by summers and whispers. Here the entries sharpened. Names appeared, then disappeared behind initials. She wrote about a partnership with two men whose smiles cut like glass. She wrote about a decision that made her wealthy and sleepless at once. She wrote, once, in the margins, I would trade every key I own for the one I threw away. The third set was harder to find because it was not hiding. It simply waited in plain sight, thin volumes lined up on the study shelf, wearing their honesty like camouflage. These pages were spare, a ledger of wins and absences, a ball held and left early, a birthday missed, a painting purchased anonymously and hung where no one could accuse her of sentiment. In one entry, a sentence alone carried more weight than the closing balances beneath it. I taught myself to live in a house like a locked box, because a locked box never asks you to stay. The house creaked as evening took hold, winter pressing a palm flat against the windows. I set traps for rainwater in pails under the eaves, and tore a pathway through the walled garden to the skeletal gazebo. There, beneath rot and vine, I found the stubborn geometry of order. Stones arranged like a compass, the remnant of a sundial, and carved into the central slab, almost erased by weather, 5 tiny stars etched above a shallow cup. Above the cradle, the journal had said. Not a nursery cradle, a stone one. a celestial lullaby hidden in daylight. I knelt until my jeans drank the damp and traced those stars with my fingertip. When I tipped the stone cup, a metal rattle answered beneath. Back inside, I pressed on the hearthstones one by one, the way she described pressing through choices until one gave under her thumb. 2 stones from the right and 3 up from the base. The pattern echoed the 5 stars like a chord played in reverse. It wobbled, then slid a fraction. Cold air licked my knuckles. I reached into the thimble-wide gap and found a small lever slick with age. When it turned, a rectangular panel the size of a book loosened and came free into my hands. Behind it, dark, the kind that isn't empty so much as waiting. The safe sat there, flush with shadow, the dial dull as the moon. I had no combination, not yet. But I had a system now, her system, breadcrumbs dropped by a woman who did not believe in kindness unless it had teeth. I slept near the hearth, the way a soldier sleeps near a wall, back turned to the room, face toward the thing that could burn me if I wasn't careful. The fire breathed. The house listened. Somewhere past midnight, I dreamed of footsteps again, only this time they didn't stop at the door. A weight sat beside me on the floor, the mattress of air compressing, and a smell, lavender braided with something like rain on stone, folded over me. I woke with the taste of a word on my tongue. Haven. In the gray before morning, I went to the study and found a single sheet tucked into the final journal's back cover. It was not numbered. It was not dated. It held only one line in that precise hand. When the fire is honest, it reveals its own hearth. Count from the scar. I stared at the massive fireplace until my eyes stung. Scars, I realized, aren't always visible. I lowered my palm to the cool stone and slid it across the face until it bumped a groove thin as a healed cut, almost at ankle height where a careless poker might have nicked it. I counted up and over as the note suggested, feeling each stone like a braille that translated grief into map. The combination wasn't numbers. It was rhythm. 3 short taps, a pause, 2 long presses, another pause, 5 quick taps, like a heartbeat, learning steadiness. The dial answered not with clicks, but with a change in pressure under my fingertips, as if the safe had decided I was listening correctly at last. I didn't open it then, not yet. The house felt like a held breath, and I understood something I hadn't before. Some doors you open too early collapse the corridors behind them. I wanted the path, not just the prize. I wanted to know what it cost her to leave me this much road. Outside, the sky brightened with the posture of snow. The driveway waited, clean and cruel. I made tea from mint I'd coaxed back to life, the cup warming a circle into my palms. Somewhere between sip and steam I smiled, small, private, fierce. Clara and Edwin thought they were counting down days. They were wrong. I was counting up, and the house was counting with me. By the time I carved the 29th mark on my wrist, Willow Creek had begun to feel like an extension of my own breath. The walls no longer sighed in protest when I passed. They listened. The house wasn't haunted, it was alive with memory, and I'd finally learned how to hear it. Snow had come overnight, cloaking the gardens, and the long drive in white silence. The safe still waited behind the hearth, patient as stone. For days, I'd circled it like a wary animal, afraid that once I opened it, something fragile in me would break. But that morning, with dawn dripping through the cracked window like liquid gold, I felt ready. The dial moved under my fingers with quiet obedience. 3 short turns, a pause, 2 long sweeps, 5 quick taps, then a click, a sound so sharp and final it cut the air in 2. Inside lay a folded document sealed with crimson wax and an envelope addressed in the precise, slanted hand I knew by heart. To my granddaughter, Lila. The letter trembled in my hands as I broke the seal. If you are reading this, you have not only survived, you have listened. I built this house on ambition and regret. I leave it to you in hope and repentance. You were always softer than the world allowed, and I mistook that softness for weakness. I see now it was strength. I never meant to test you, only to give you what no amount of money could buy, the courage to belong to yourself. Her words blurred as tears struck the page. I unfolded the second document, the true will. Its clauses shimmered like a riddle resolved. The estate remained mine, but with a twist worthy of Lila Corbin. A portion would fund a foundation for artists and local preservation. And Clara and Edwin, if they wish to receive their share, must work under my direction for 5 years, earning it not by inheritance, but by service. I laughed, a wet, broken sound that startled the room. My grandmother, in death, had done what she never could in life, forced us into the same story. The rumble of tires tore through the quiet before noon. I'd been expecting them. Their final inspection, their last attempt to watch me crumble. I stood in the foyer, journals and the sealed will arranged neatly on the table. The fire burned bright behind me, the safe door ajar like a confession. Clara swept in first, wrapped in fur, her heels striking the floor like punctuation marks. Edwin followed, stiff-backed, face pale from the cold or anticipation. "Well," Clara said, her gaze sweeping the room, "you made it. Barely." "Barely's enough," I replied. 30 days. Edwin sniffed. "We'll need confirmation. The lawyer will—" I cut him off. "He'll confirm everything when he reads this." I lifted the new will. The wax seal caught the firelight, bleeding crimson across my fingers. Clara frowned. "What's that supposed to be?" "The truth," I said, setting it on the table beside the journals. "The real one. The version Grandma didn't trust either of you to find." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the fire cracking, the wind pushing against the window panes. Then I began to read aloud, not the legal text, but the letter that came with it. My voice wavered at first, then steadied as Evelyn's words filled the room. When I reached the line about softness being strength, Clara's eyes flickered. Something behind her perfect poise cracked. Edwin shifted, folding his arms, jaw clenched tight. She didn't mean that," Clara stammered. "Mother was never sentimental." "She wasn't," I said quietly, "until she realized she'd raised us all to mistake love for control." I turned to Edwin. "She wrote about you too, about the time you broke her teacup when you were 9 and lied about it. She said you were kind but afraid to own your mistakes." His mouth parted, color draining from his face. Then I faced Clara. "And you? She wrote about you borrowing her necklace for parties. Said you loved the shine more than the heart behind it. But she forgave you. She forgave all of us." Clara's chin trembled. "You're lying!" "Read it," I said, sliding the papers toward her. "See for yourself." She hesitated, then snatched the letter, her eyes darting across the lines. Edwin leaned in over her shoulder. By the time they reached the final paragraph, the part about working for the foundation, their silence was heavier than any argument could be. "Under you?" Edwin said finally, voice cracking. "She expects us to serve under you?" "She expects us to rebuild what she broke," I said, together. Clara's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No," I said. "It makes me responsible." The fire popped. Somewhere upstairs, a door shifted in its frame, like the house was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. For the first time, Clara didn't have an answer. She stared at the flames, her reflection flickering, half fury, half grief. Then, without a word, she placed the letter back on the table and walked toward the front door. Edwin followed, slower, eyes lowered, as if he'd forgotten how to stand tall. When the door closed behind them, I let the silence stretch, then sank into the nearest chair. The weight of 30 days slid off me all at once. I looked around the room, at the journals stacked like bricks of memory, the fire painting gold over old wood, and felt the strangest ache, peace. The next morning, I began packing, not to leave, but to stay differently. I called the lawyer from his office line, my first contact in a month. His surprise crackled down the phone line, followed by cautious congratulations. "Your grandmother was a complicated woman," he said softly. "Yes," I answered, glancing around at the house that had both starved and fed me. "So am I." A year later, Willow Creek Foundation held its first board meeting in the restored library. Sunlight poured through clean windows, landing on shelves where the journals now sat preserved behind glass. The long table gleamed. My reflection met me in its surface, tired, sure, but stronger than the woman who'd arrived with nothing. Across from me sat Clara and Edwin. Their suits were simpler now, their edges dulled by humility. Clara handled the event coordination, her charm finally put to use for something real. Edwin managed grants, his meticulous nature turned from greed to stewardship. Sometimes they still slipped. Old habits don't vanish, they retreat. But there was effort in their eyes, and that was more than I ever expected. We began discussing applications, local artists, historians, restoration projects. Every voice mattered. No one spoke louder than they needed to. The house hummed with quiet life, the sound of redemption, of work still in progress. When the meeting adjourned, Clara lingered. She touched one of the journals through the glass, tracing the leather spine. Mother would have hated the dust in here, she said softly. Then it's good she left it to us to clean, I replied. She smiled faintly, almost shy. You've done well, Lila. I wanted to resent her, but I couldn't. We've done well, I corrected. Her eyes met mine, unguarded for the first time. Then she nodded and walked away, her heels clicking a gentler rhythm than before. I remained at the window, watching the afternoon lights scatter across the snow-covered grounds. The house no longer loomed, it breathed. The ghosts had quieted, not because they'd vanished, but because they'd been heard. I thought of my grandmother's letter, the ink fading, but the words still sharp. Softness is strength. It had taken a lifetime and 30 haunted days to understand what she meant. I placed my hand on the window pane, feeling the cold through the glass, and whispered to the reflection of the woman staring back. You found her story. Now write your own. The house stood silent, proud, alive. And for the first time, so was I.